All right, dude, we're back. We're going vintage. We're in Genesis chapter 3 to 9. We left off in Genesis 1 and 2, talking about God's creation, talking about the Imago Dei being made in his image, talking about family. And now we're going to get to see where the rest of the story leads us. And so let's just jump into this thing, dude. We're in chapter 3.
I'm just
What
glad
happens?
that we did 2 chapters in 45 minutes, and we're going to do 6 chapters in less. So
Yeah, well, good luck.
let's go.
Good luck.
Let's go. Genesis chapter 3. So, part of the framing for the whole series was ancient truths, modern fractures.
Right.
And so I'm trying to think through those. You get to Genesis chapter 3, and I think you would agree with this. Genesis chapter 3 probably frames our, 90% of our worldview as Christians.
Yeah.
Like when we look around and we're trying to make sense of the world, Genesis chapter 3 is basically the beginning of answering all the hard questions we have to ask. So why is there evil? Why is there suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? Why is there sickness, disease, death, natural disasters? All those questions get answered in Genesis chapter 3. Then I would say the more prevailing question is, okay, what's God doing about that? Can he do anything? Does he want to do anything? And so all those questions get asked. So I think that's the importance of Genesis chapter 3.
Yeah. You just said something that made me think about those questions are great questions, but then they get tied to God's character too, right? Of like, well, if good things are happening to bad people, what does that say about God? What does it say about God that he would allow infants to die or allow my wife to have cancer for 3 years and suffer and never heal her? Like, then it starts, like, these deep questions about our world actually then start to like become questions about, is God actually good? Right? And so I'm curious, like, how that's going to flesh out in these next, what are we doing, 6 chapters? So yeah, as you were just talking, I was like, man, I would love for us to kind of press into like, is God actually good?
Yeah.
You know, like, I think that that's probably one of our deepest questions as humans, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. Like, we are trying to make sense of like, is God actually good? And there is this dynamic of like, well, the God of the Old Testament compared to Jesus too. So is this God of the Old Testament, is he actually a good God? Can we trust him? Or does he have some character flaws? Yeah. So situate us, dude. Like, what's happening in chapter 3? What do we need to take out of this?
So Genesis chapter 3, we are naked and unashamed, man and woman hanging out in the garden. Remember, a garden is a great place. It's an abundant place. God has given them everything they need. They can eat from any tree of the garden except the one in the middle. They are taken care of. They are in a great relationship with each other, great relationship with God. They have no wants or needs. Yet this crafty little thing comes scurrying along, I believe, from the sermon, which is your idea. Little like Randall from Monsters, Inc. like creature scurries along and he's like slithering in Eve's ear. But this is really what happens is we have this serpent. The serpent is called Crafty, a beast of the field. So it's created by God. And then also, I think the interesting thing is we just assume that the serpent is Satan, but it actually doesn't tell us in Genesis chapter 3 that this was Satan. I think we can assume it was. I think we can go to Revelation 12:9, and it talks about the ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. So that's why we make the reference that this is Satan, so we can believe that.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so Satan comes, and it's interesting. So there's a threefold move here. I think people probably know this story. So the serpent deceives Eve.
Right.
To sin. And this is how sin enters the world and messes everything up. I think a few things to note here, just like as far as application. So personally in my life, I have sinned before. I want you all to know that Mark has never sinned in his life. And so this will be less relatable for Mark, but for the rest of us who have sinned, I think it's interesting what like the move he makes here, right? So he attacks God's word. Did God really say? I mean, if we just think about times we've sinned in our own life, did God really say you can't do that? Or you try to like skirt it around? We're like, I can't touch it, but I can like hover over it, right? You're like the little kids in the back seat of like, don't hit your sister. Well, I'm not hitting her, but you're like, just not
air punching her.
Yeah, exactly. God's judgment is attacked. So will you surely die? God said you'll surely die. Will you? So like, does God actually have the power, the authority? Did God tell the truth that will be the judgment that comes if you do it? And then God's goodness is attacked. Hey, God actually just doesn't want you to have what's best. God told you not to eat from it because if you God knows if you eat from it, you'll be like God. And so he's actually withholding something good from you. I mean, I think sexual sin's easy to go to, right?
Sure.
Well, dude, God doesn't want me to have fun. God doesn't want me to have sex with my girlfriend. Yeah. Like, God's just this like old, boring dude who's like a prude. No, God actually has something best. But that's sin. Like every time sin enters your life, I would say like we could look at those three things being attacked. And then I also like that the fruit was desirable.
So you mentioned, we can get to the fruit in a second, but just you mentioned the serpent. We have good account that this is the devil. And I think most people would think of the serpent as the devil, but you pointed to Revelation 12 as proof. Like we could certainly say this is the devil, but it calls him crafty. What does that mean? Like we don't use that word crafty, when I think of crafty, I literally think about like my daughter, like building a craft. So like, what does this mean? And then he's like injecting all these lies. So what's going on there? What's the author trying to point out about the serpent?
Yeah. And maybe I'll even rope this into like the fruit being desirable, because what you see with the serpent isn't that he comes to Eve and says, hey, eat this fruit and you're going to screw everything up. He's crafty. He comes and he gives a bunch of partial truths, right? And so, hey, you won't surely die. Well, they're not going to die instantly, but they are going to bring death into the world.
Right.
God knows you become like God. Actually, yeah, you're going to now know good from evil. You're actually taking this idea of like moral judgment upon yourself. But what they don't understand is there's this whole other thing that comes with it. Yeah. So eventually they're going to eat from the fruit. And I think that's interesting with the fruit. So the fruit is physically appealing. So it says it's good for food. Yeah. It's aesthetically pleasing. It says it's a delight to the eye. Then it's intellectually captivating. There's a desire to make one wise.
Interesting.
And I said this in the sermon, I think it's so true, is if sin isn't enjoyable or doesn't look enjoyable, like you're doing sin wrong. Drug addict for a few years. Like the thing about drugs is
you said that way too proud.
Not proud. But I can say that I understand, because the reason people get addicted to drugs is because they work. Like if drugs didn't work, if substances didn't work, if being a workaholic didn't work, like if all these things didn't work, people wouldn't do it. Totally. But they do. Now the intended consequences are never what you think they're going to be, which is why it's ultimately destructive. Yeah. So we see that with the fruit. And so the serpent is crafty. All these half lies, trying to convince them, showing how desirable it is. And again, I just think this is so applicable to our lives of like when we are struggling with sin, it is for all these reasons. We doubt God's word, we doubt God's character, and then sin looks fun, and so we end up giving into it.
So this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that God said don't eat from, right? And then the serpent is tempting them to eat of it. Is God trying to withhold like wisdom from them though? Is he trying to hold, because it sounds like, hey, there doesn't sound like this is a bad tree to eat from. You'll just gain what's good and bad in the world. Is God trying to, like, why doesn't God want them to eat from that tree?
Yeah, I think a number of things are going on. One, even if the tree is able to give them something, it's going to bring absolute havoc into the world. Like the reason everything is messed up is because they eat from this tree. Right. Natural disaster, disease, the reason bad things happen to good people. Like all of this is going to happen because sin enters the world. Sin enters the world because there is God, who's the creator, who's this supreme authority. We just don't think of things this way, right? Like we don't want to think about God being a supreme authority who can actually tell us what to do. Then you have humans who are created and told what to do. Again, they're lacking nothing, and they disobey God. So the first issue is they disobey God. God tells them not to, and they eat of it. So even if God was withholding something from them, it's within his ability and right to do so, because he's a creator of everything. Two, what happens with them taking and wanting to have this knowledge of good and evil is they're literally saying, I want the autonomy to judge morality for myself.
Interesting.
Which is like so relevant to today, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What does that mean to want to judge morality for myself?
So we'll get into this later too, but one of the things we look at God and we say, all right, God, if you're so good, why don't you judge the evil that's in the world? And we actually place ourselves as this moral authority over God, being like, well, if I was God, I would do things this way because I know better. Totally. And I think that's part of the fall is this idea that we're going to know better than God. We're going to choose better. Eve and Adam taking and eating of the fruit is to say there's actually something we want that God told us we can't have. So we think we know better than God that we should have this thing.
Yeah. And they're wanting to define what is good and evil for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to have to submit to God, right?
Exactly.
They don't want to have to listen to God and go to God and ask him, is this good? Is this bad? They're going, I'll define what's good and bad for me.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is we literally all do this, right? You got 8 billion people in our world that are all trying to define what's good and bad in our world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why our world is so chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you tell me, hey, what's good for me is to come into your house and eat all your food, I'm like, bro, you better get out of my house. Stop eating my food because that's not good for me. And we're all trying to define what's good for me, what's bad for me. And when they come in contrast to somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
that's where chaos really starts to develop.
Totally.
And so we do see them eat the fruit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what pursues after that? Like, what's the consequences of them rebelling against God and taking the fruit and partaking in that?
Yeah, so they eat the fruit, they run and they hide. So it's funny, they think they're going to have this like godlike ability afterwards. And in some ways they do. Their eyes are open. And instead of realizing, like, they eat the fruit thinking we're going to win, they eat the fruit and realize, oh crap, I'm naked. And now they're not naked and unashamed. They're naked and ashamed. They're naked and they go and hide. You instantly see that there's probably a something that has disrupted their relationship with each other, their relationship with God. They need to cover up from each other. They need to cover up from God. They go and they hide, and then God confronts them. And what I think we should jump to is like the curses that get laid out. Because I think this is where we start to see now, like, oh, when I look at the world, these things have happened. Actually, God tells us these things are going to happen because of this here. So they all blame each other, which is also supernatural. Not supernatural, like supernatural, but like supernatural for us to do.
Normal.
When I make a wrong turn, I blame my wife for not giving me better directions.
Yeah.
We are this way. It's unfortunate. So the serpent's interesting. So we see his mode of movement changed. So God tells him that he's going to be on his belly now. Just super fun.
So what is that like? So are snakes slithering on their bellies because of what happened in the garden where God's like, dude, Randall, I'm lopping off these legs and now you're going to crawl on your belly.
Yeah. So
is that what
maybe
happened?
this was like a dragon and now it's a snake. It seems that most scholars that we'd probably align with actually see that this on their belly is actually a Hebrew idiom for like eating dust. And eating dust is actually, like if I were to tell you like go eat dust, it's actually a sign of humiliation. And so whether or not his actual mode was changed of like standing down on his belly, for sure there is now a humiliation brought upon the serpent because of this.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes me think of Revelation 12, where there's this like casting down, right? So when you say go eat dust, it kind of feels like God's casting the devil down and humiliating him. He's shaming him. It's like public shame is what it feels like.
Yeah, so the only question there would be, is this also the fall of Satan?
Right.
Which some would say it is. We don't have enough evidence to figure it out.
What happens with Adam and Eve? So the snake gets cursed, and then what's the curse that pursues with Adam and Eve?
So the one thing I don't want us to miss here is the other thing on the serpent is the bruised heel, crushed head. So Genesis 3:15 is the proto-evangelium, first gospel, where God says to this serpent, to Satan, hey, there's gonna be a seed from the woman. You're gonna bruise his heel, but he's gonna crush your head, which is the first foreshadowing that someone's gonna come and reverse the curse that had just happened. And we'll talk about God's grace in this in a second.
Yeah.
But then women. So an interesting one here is they're gonna have pain, or it's gonna be toilsome in childbearing. And Mark, this is actually something you had brought up. I don't know if you want to say something about that here.
Yeah, I mean, my question about this was, is this just like you're going to hurt when you're delivering a baby? Is that the only consequence that's happening here? And if not, then what is the author trying to get at? And like, how are we seeing that actually play out?
Yeah. So it certainly seems like it's more than just pain in childbirth. I successfully delivered both of our sons. My wife hates that I just said that, but I was in the room. I was there. I caught them. There is certainly pain in childbearing, right? But also this idea of toilsome, I would say, extends to all things pertaining to actually motherhood. And so this thing, and I think we would say for most women, motherhood ends up being kind of the single greatest joy and struggle of their life.
Right.
And so within motherhood, there's toilsome with labor. We got a whole bunch of pregnant moms right now at Vintage. Right. Feel sorry for all of them. It looks like it sucks being pregnant. That's not even delivery yet. Just
totally.
Also, I think could refer to infertility for miscarriages as well. And then also, as children grow up, there's just pain in motherhood.
Right.
That you will pour everything and love these kids more than your own self. And inevitably, there's some mode of rejection that will come from them. Someday they're going to leave your house.
Right.
And so I think there's just pain throughout the whole idea of motherhood.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be a strained relationship with her husband.
Yeah.
So the strained relationship with her husband is really interesting. Her desire will be to rule over him, but he will be the head of the house. And I've talked about this before, but this is the very foundation for marital friction. I think what we see here happening is, and I think in a lot of marriages, if we're honest about some tension points, is women want to rule over the household and they want to be the one to make the decision and make the call. And I'm not saying women can't be leaders or any of that. I'm just saying the natural way God designed it is for the husband to be the head. And then the sin nature has given women this desire to rule over their husband and their household. And I think there's also a sin nature where the husband becomes passive as well. So you have a husband who should be making decisions, who should be leading strongly, move towards passivity because of the fall. And then women who should be submitted under their husbands want to rule over their husbands in the household. And this is all a cause of the fall.
Yeah, that's crazy that you see that in the very beginning of this too. Of like you see where marital, and I mean, just a lot, right? Like you're seeing the thing that literally sustains humanity, which is reproducing humans. Like you see the pain points right in the very beginning. And then the things that allow humanity to flourish, which is marriages, like you see the pain point right in the very beginning. So like the two most central things to what it means to be a human, you're getting answers as to why we're feeling the brokenness in the world. I want you to move on to Adam and the curse that Adam receives. And why that's significant, especially for like men. Yeah. Why is that significant for us?
So it's similar to the woman where the curse is on Adam. Hey, you're going to work, but now it's going to be laborsome and toilsome. So we talked last time, work was actually given pre-fall. And so work is a good thing that God meant for good. Well, now Adam's going to still work, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be toilsome. He's going to work by the sweat of his brow. And so it's interesting because Augustine actually ends up talking about how in both of these curses, the thing that was supposed to bring the most life, so being a mom and motherhood and her husband to a woman and the work for a man, is now actually going to be the thing that caused the most trouble.
Interesting.
However, he says that it's a grace. And we talked about God's grace in Genesis 3:15 being that, hey, sin just happened and God's already saying, I'm going to take care of it someday. We know that's a callback to Jesus. They didn't know that yet, but Jesus will fulfill Genesis 3:15. And here there's a grace because our natural tendency would have been for women to try to find all their identity, value, and worth in motherhood and in being a wife. And for men, they would try to find all their identity in their work. And now those two areas that we would have felt the most naturally to like fulfill us is now not going to fulfill us. Yeah. And so we're actually forced now to go to something greater to fulfill us, which will ultimately be our relationship with Christ. And so it's interesting to see that, but it's actually a grace that God gives them that those things won't fulfill them. So they have to go to God for ultimate fulfillment.
Dude, that's so good because I just see this so often where men's default to try to figure out my purpose is always towards work, you know, and they will kill themselves in their work because they're searching for purpose outside of God. And then the same thing with mothers. And there's some interesting stuff on moms with sons who get married. And, you know, we hear those stories about like the terrible mother-in-law who like won't let her son go. And I think that there's like, not to just like poke fun at people and, you know, I think there's just a reality that like this actually speaks to the fact that women will typically try to find their purpose and their fulfillment in their kids because they're a good gift. But now it's been distorted where now you're trying to find your identity and your sole purpose in that apart from God. And it actually starts to create more chaos in the world. Same with men. With our jobs, we can tend to see ourselves as like, I have purpose in this. It's going to give me meaning. I'm going to get my identity out of it. And then men will retire or they get fired. And now it's like, dude, who am I? What's going on? Or they'll sacrifice their family for the sake of their career. And you just see it play out over and over again. And the thing that was striking to me that we talked about was both of the things that God command, or the blessings that God gave to Adam and Eve within their purposes about working the field and producing,
being fruitful, multiplying.
So like producing crops, and then with women being fruitful and having babies. God blesses them because he's a God of life, and both of these things bring life, right? And then in the curses are bringing death. Like, the work is going to be hard. The ground's not going to produce what it should produce because there's the thorn and thistles now. And so where life was supposed to be, the curse is bringing about death. And that's why I thought it was awesome that you brought up infertility. And what hit me was like, how many women and married couples in our church or conversations we've had have had miscarriages or can't get pregnant because of infertility. And it's like the womb was supposed to create life, and now the curse comes in and is actually restricting life and bringing death into the place that God intended life to be created. And so the devil says like, hey, you're not going to die. But we see immediately in the curses, like, no, death has entered into all of these areas where God created life to be. And as we think about life and death, we literally see the first murder in chapter 4 with Cain and Abel. And so let's jump into Cain and Abel, and we see them bring an offering to God. Why does God not accept Cain's offering, but he does accept Abel's offering? And then just kind of like walk us through the story after the fallout of that.
Yeah, so fall happens, Adam and Eve sin, the curses are given. One thing I didn't say would just be that God actually also curses the ground. And so that is natural disasters, disease, like what the ground should produce is not going to produce anymore.
I probably jumped a little too quick.
No, it's good because it'll all keep building. And then God's grace in that. God's grace also is in that they have these sons, which is a big thing. Maybe just one other thing, I guess, before we leave chapter 3, I'll say quickly. Adam was tempted in a garden where he had everything he needed. Jesus ends up being tempted in a desert after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. And Jesus doesn't give in to the serpent when the serpent comes with a bunch of half-truths trying to use God's word against him. And so I'll just say that for those struggling with sin, which we all do, by the way, our hope, it's not all doom and gloom. Our hope is to look to Jesus, who is not just our role model, but actually did the thing we couldn't do so that in him, we actually do have victory over temptation.
Yeah.
I had that note, and I was like, yeah, that's actually worth saying. That's great. Somebody else probably said that. It wasn't my idea. So now we get to Cain and Abel. So Adam and Eve, they are able to be fruitful and multiply. They have these 2 sons. And it just says after some time. Got to love the Bible there, which literally just means after some time. Or it says in the course of time. So some time has gone by. Clearly, these babies are probably now men. They have 2 jobs. Cain is like his dad, where he tills the ground, so produces crops. Abel is out with the farm life. He is a shepherd. So they bring their offerings to God. The things we're told is that Cain brings an offering of fruit, and Abel brings the firstborn of his flock and the fat portions. And so I think there's a lot, because the Bible doesn't explicitly say this is why God accepts Abel's offering and not Cain's. I think what we have here is Abel brings the firstborn of his flock. So he brings the very first one to be born. He has no guarantee that anyone else will be born. And so it's actually an offering of trust. Hey, God, I trust you with my first. So it's that he trusts God. And then he brings the fat portions. So anyone who likes barbecue, come on. The best part is the fat.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes it smell good. That's what like marbleizes and brings all the flavor. So he brings the fat portion. So he brings the first and his best, which is actually how we frame giving at Vintage because of this. We don't get hung up in all the tithe, whatever. I think that's fine. I practice it. Do what you want. People get all hung up with it. I go all the way back to Genesis chapter 4 and say, hey, what offering is pleasing to God? Your first and your best. You trust God and you're giving worth to God because of the quality of the offering you're bringing. Good. And it seems like Cain brought something, but not the first and not the best. And so Cain's offering was not acceptable because of the quality of the offering and also the character of the offer. So there was a character flaw with Cain. We could jump to Hebrews and I think read some of that as well. The result, though, is that Cain gets frustrated. Cain throws a temper tantrum. So again, so like indicative of how we act, right?
Right.
Cain knows what Abel brought was better, but God blesses Abel. So Cain goes and throws a pity party. Well, why won't God bless me? Well, Abel brought something better, but like, why does it matter? Like, just like all the temper tantrum, silly, immature things we do. Like, we see that in the very first family. Spoiler alert, Cain meets Abel out in the field, murders him over this thing because his offering wasn't acceptable because he didn't bring the right offering. He kills his brother. So sin enters the world very quickly. We get the first murder.
Yeah.
And then things just are going to progressively get worse kind of from there.
So what happens? Can you talk about, all right, Cain, he kills his brother. I think most of us are familiar with that. What happens to Cain after that? What does God do with Cain? And why is that significant for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So God then is going to curse Cain. And so not just a curse from like cursing the ground, but it's actually going to curse Cain. What have you done? I forgot what microphone here is. So he tells him, my punishment is greater than I can bear because he drives him away from the ground, is what it says. So something interesting here, when we talked about the garden being this temple-like place, you enter the garden from the east.
Yeah.
And so what we see here actually is as Adam and Eve are cast out, they're cast out to the east. And now as Cain is cursed, and Cain's going to be a wanderer.
In the temple, they entered the temple from the east too.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
So that's why we can make the parallel between the garden and the temple, because they both are entering and exiting from the east side of it.
Yeah, it tends to add to why we have temple language for sure. So Adam and Eve are cast out to the west, or to the east. Now you have Cain being cast out, and he's going to be a wanderer even further to the east. So you actually see this movement away from the presence of God. And now you have Cain, who's going to be pushed even further away. And so the other interesting thing with this is, one, God still shows grace to Cain. Cain's able to reproduce. Cain has a wife. Cain has kids. But Cain is no longer going to be the promised line. So there's this promised line. Somebody, Genesis 3:15, there's a seed of the woman who's going to crush the head of the serpent.
Yeah.
Abel is now dead.
Yes.
And Cain is now cursed. So the two seeds have now been basically gotten rid of. And so the question we really are asking now is like, where's this seed going to come from?
Yeah. How's God going to fulfill that promise?
How is God going to fulfill the promise?
Yeah.
And so what we get, should we just keep rolling? You good to keep rolling?
Yeah. I do want to just say one thing that was striking to me is when Cain is getting cast farther east from God's presence is because of his sin.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times are we just in that perpetual sin and we feel so far from God? Like that speaks to our reality, right? Like when we find ourselves continuing to sin, knowing we're sinning, we are squashing the Holy Spirit in our life and we feel so distant to God, you know? And I think that it's just like the Bible speaks to the reality of our life. And I just didn't want to pass that up too quickly because that's real for us, you know? Like we need to repent, because if we don't repent, like we are not going to be close to God.
Totally.
We need to turn back. We need to go back to him. Because the more that we do it, the farther we feel away from God. You mentioned this in your sermon as well, that Cain is afraid to be killed. And the only person who's ever killed anybody is Cain. So why is he worried about being murdered? Because he's a murderer. Like when you brought that out, I was like, oh no, duh.
Yeah.
Like, why am I afraid that this person's trying to manipulate me? Because I'm a manipulator. Why do I think this person's gossiping about me? Because I'm a gossiper. Mm-hmm. Why do I feel like this person is like trying to, pull one over me? Because I try to pull one over people. Like that, when you said that, I was like, dude, that's so good. Like we're like pointing at somebody, but we're really just looking at a mirror.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we could talk about projection and everything else.
Yeah.
The thief is worried someone's going to steal from him.
Right.
It's classic.
But the thing that we're wrestling with as the readers of the text is like this seed. God makes this promise. It's going to come through the seed of Adam and Eve. And the two guys that were supposed to carry on that promise, one's cursed, one's dead. Mm-hmm. And then we find ourselves in chapter 5.
Yeah, we got to get to the end of chapter 4. So let's roll there. So Cain, the grace on Cain is Cain's still able to be fruitful and multiply. He has a wife. He has descendants. And so we get a quick list. We're going to start getting into some genealogies. We get a quick list of the descendants of Cain. And it kind of climaxes with this dude named Lamech. And I like to say that Lamech gives us our first gangster rap song. So what Lamech basically says is Lamech goes, yo, I've got multiple wives. So now we see polygamy for the very first time in the Bible. And he says, hey, Cain killed his brother. I'll kill a dude just for looking at me the wrong way.
Yeah, that's wild.
He says if Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. The interesting thing is Cain's revenge was going to be from God. God was going to avenge Cain if anyone came after him. Lamech saying, hey, I'm going to avenge myself, and it's going to be even better than what God could do. So Lamech, what we have here is Lamech's just evil. Yeah. Like Lamech is evil and wicked, a few descendants from Cain, and we have just like Cain at least wanted to like hide the fact he murdered his brother. Yeah. Now you have Lamech out in the street being like, I'm a murderer.
Yeah. He's like
what about it?
He's like Kanye, calling himself Jesus. I'm God.
There you go. But nonetheless, he's saying, I got guns, I got women, I ain't afraid to use both.
Yeah.
So things have gotten bad is the point.
Right.
And we still have no idea. The seed is clearly not coming through Cain at this point too, right? So anyway, then we get into chapter 5 and we preach this. It's a giant genealogy. But what we have is right at the end of chapter 4 is another moment of grace. We see grace started through the whole thing, which is the fact that Adam and Eve now have another son, and his name is Seth. And so now we have, okay, there is a seed of who the promise is going to come through. And we have to acknowledge, this is so cool. So this is chapter 4, verse 26. To Seth also a son was born. So Adam and Eve have Seth, and then Seth begins to have kids. And it says, at that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So this gives us the clue that it's from Seth's line that people actually start worshiping God again. Get this really long. There's hope. Exactly. Okay. There's grace in all this. So now in chapter 5, we get this long list of now Seth's descendants. And in the middle, we have this guy named Enoch. And so if you take how many generations it is from Cain to Lamech, right, you have like this really evil, but it's the same amount of generation from Seth to Enoch. And Enoch was a man who walked with God and walked with God so closely, God actually took him up to heaven without dying. And so you see, this is now a godly line. Yeah. More or less. Why
do you think the author did that? Where he did the same amount of generations of evil to Lamech and then the same amount of generations that land on Enoch, this very godly man who ascends to heaven.
Yeah. Well, I think we should be careful to think that the author just like made it up.
Right.
So it was the actual generations from each. Yeah. So it was something that God did. I think throughout the Bible, God gives us these like awesome parallels and like literary things that make sense. I say that because sometimes I'll be like, the author said. It's like, God's actually the one who said all this.
Now I'm like, well, dude, I believe that the Bible is real.
But I just wanted to point out, it wasn't that it was some literary technique the author was just doing to point it out. Yeah. It was actually God arranged it that way, so it would happen that way. And I think that we would draw the conclusion that God is doing something different now with the line of Seth. Which we'll just keep cruising through this because this is where like I think the macro narrative here is really interesting.
Right.
So the very end, we get this guy named Noah. So Noah is a descendant from Seth. And Noah's going to have the flood story. However, before we get that, we get this really crazy section in chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, which is Mark's favorite section of the Bible. Do you want to tell them why it's your favorite section of the Bible?
Yeah, dude, because I thought we were going to get into like this crazy like angels coming down and having sex with women and these crazy like giant Nephilim people that were gonna like, you know, I don't know.
Be like
maybe they made the
UFC
temples
fighters.
in Egypt. I don't know. Like who are these people? Are they like, is this where we get Goliath from? You know, like we have these semi like godlike. It's like Hercules, you know? Like, are we seeing Hercules? Is Hercules real?
Yes.
Is that what's happening here? And
All right.
then you burst my bubble.
Yep.
You made it not fun.
I made the Bible not fun. That's probably accurate. I'm trying to make the Bible fun, guys. So here's what Mark's alluding to. Here's where we get, and I want you to just catch this. So we come from this story of Adam and Eve, to Cain and Abel, this guy named Lamech, to this guy named Seth, and this like godly line. And then we get this like insert right here. It says, when people began to multiply on the face of the land, daughters were born to them. The sons of God. So the daughters of man were attractive. And then we get the Nephilim mentioned. So we have to do a few things. Who are the sons of God? Who are the daughters of man? And who are the Nephilim?
Yep.
So there is a historic Jewish view that a lot of people like. It's the most exciting. It's the most like imaginary, which is that the sons of God were angels,
right,
fallen angels that came to earth and began to have sexual relations with human women.
Yeah.
And
the daughters of man.
Yeah. And because these like angel demon things had sex with people, they create this like crazy demigod offspring, which are the Nephilim.
Right.
So even just saying that, like, it kind of feels crazy to say it, but that's actually probably like the most widely held view that that's what's going on.
Yeah.
So I reject that view.
And they pull a lot of that from the Book of Enoch.
The Book of Enoch, which is apocryphal language or literature.
Right.
That's
not in our canon.
That's not in our canon.
It's not in our actual Bible.
The thing they do have is oftentimes when this term sons of God is used, it's talking about angelic beings. It's not used a ton, but the few times it is used in the Bible, it's used of angelic beings, which is the most compelling case for that argument.
Right.
Why I don't find it compelling is a few things. One, throughout this whole thing, Moses is the author, and he is intentionally mythologizing this creation account from all the other creation accounts. So in all the other creation accounts, there are these like big gods and little gods and like crazy things going on, these wars between the two, and they're creating mankind not in God's image, but to like serve them and be their slaves. And there's these demigods, and there are like demons having sex with women, and like all these crazy things going on.
Right.
Noah up to this point has been intentionally showing how this is not this creation account. Right. This is not what God's doing. So it feels weird to then have this random insert of like crazy mythology, give no more of the context, and like move on. I would say the other thing is we're told that when we're in heaven someday we'll be like the angels, not given in marriage. So it doesn't seem like angels actually have reproductive abilities, which I feel you got to jump over that hump somewhere.
Yeah.
The other thing is the entire micro narrative, or I guess macro narrative through the micro, would be who's the promised line.
Yeah.
And what's going to come from them.
Yeah.
And the whole point right now is we're tracing the line of Seth to be like, it's someone going to come from his line to take care of it. And so I actually take the view that sons of God should be used adjectively. So it's the godly ones, which we would trace back to the line of Seth. And then the daughters of man would be the daughters that came from the line of Cain and anybody else. And over again through the Bible, we have God telling his people not to be unequally yoked. We have that in the New Testament.
We see
don't marry someone who's an unbeliever.
Right.
We see it when they enter the promised land. Hey, don't intermarry with the Canaanites. Why? Because God's against interracial marriage? No, because he knows they have different gods. And if you marry people that are serving another god, you're going to be pulled astray. By the way, exactly how it plays out when they enter the promised land. And so I think it's very much in line with what God's telling them. Hey, line of Seth, who's following me, if you go marry with the people who aren't following me, it's going to be bad. What do we have? Well, the line of Seth, they end up intermarrying with the daughters of Cain, the other women. They end up being led away from God. And what we have here at the end is that things are so bad, God said he's going to destroy mankind. He actually says that he regretted that he had ever made them, and it grieved him to his heart.
Yeah.
And so for me, the idea that the sons of God is actually the line of Seth, they're intermarrying with the other women who aren't following God, and it's continuing to bring destruction and sin and corruption on the earth.
So the one thing that I would like you to speak to, because I think that's all good, And I think what's important about that is it's actually driving the story forward.
Correct.
Right? We're not just getting like this random story that we're like, what the heck are we supposed to do with this? It actually is pushing the narrative the way that God intended it to be, where it's pushing towards Christ. But I think and I don't want to belabor this too, because I feel like we can get into this area and we're actually missing the main point of what is actually happening in the text. But it wouldn't be responsible for us to pass the Nephilim, right? So like, all right, if this is true, if the godly ones are the lineage of Seth and the daughter of men are like the lineage of Cain, and the issue is intermarriage of different religions is probably an easy way of saying it. What the heck? Why did they mention the Nephilim? I don't get that.
So this certainly would be easy if the Nephilim are mentioned because they're like these demigods, half angel, half human. It seems like what's happening here. So the word's only used one other time, as far as I can remember, in the Bible, and it's used to describe the giant-like people who are in the Promised Land. So Israel, they're getting ready to go into the Promised Land. They send 12 spies in, and the 12 spies go in, and they come back, and 10 of the spies are like, we're never going in there. Because they're going to go take it over militarily.
Right.
And they're like, these people are giants in there. The Nephilim are in there. So it's the only time we get the word used. And so Nephilim seem to be some type of maybe giant-like person, a type of person. It seems best explained, because there's a lot of like things you get into here, that the Nephilim were a generational marker. So the way that we would say, hey, World War II happened when Gen X was alive, or when Gen X was in their prime. That would be similar to what they're doing with the Nephilim here. The people who heard this would have known the Nephilim were these people who were around at this point in time. And so it's actually just like a time stamp or like a time marker that mentioning the Nephilim here. That is the most boring view. If we said like in
the time of the Civil War,
something
we'd be like, oh yeah, late 1800s. It's more of that than saying the sons of God and the daughters of man produced the Nephilim.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And humility has to be done here. Guys, people way smarter than me disagree with me on this.
Yeah.
I could disagree with me on this. Minor issue here.
Right.
Yeah. And so we don't want to get hung up on it, but it is fun to talk about. It's fun to have ideas. If you disagree with me, that's okay. Gavin Ortland just released a video holding the completely different view.
Yeah.
He's way smarter than me. Yeah. I respect him. I did comment and tell him that I thought he was wrong and I was right. But so let's move on. Wild. Because here's the important part. The important part in this is mankind has become more and more corrupt.
Right.
Mankind naturally does not get more good. We get more bad. That's bad English, but here it is. Here's the key though, is verse 8. So God is ready to blot out man from the face of the earth. He's ready to destroy it all. And he says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And I love that because it reminds me also in the epistles when it talks about our previous state. We were once alienated and separated from God, but God in his great mercy saved us. So that idea of like, but God, but no, finding grace. So then we get into 6, and we're going to cruise through this because we're at like 45 minutes. But you want to get into the flood.
Yeah.
So the whole point here is that Noah ends up finding favor, and the word for favor is grace in the eyes of the Lord. Which maybe the natural question is why?
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Okay, so it says that Noah is righteous, blameless in his generation, and walked with God. The biggest deal here to catch is that later the author of Hebrews, which by the way, the New Testament often gives really great commentary to the Old Testament, which is really helpful. So the author of Hebrews says, by faith, this is Hebrews 11:7, by faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness. So Noah inherited righteousness. Why?
Interesting.
The righteousness that comes by faith. So Noah was seen as righteous and blameless because of his faith. And we see his faith played out. It took Noah basically 100 years to build the ark.
That's crazy.
This whole time, people probably think he's insane, think he's crazy. Yet Noah lived to fear God instead of fearing man, which I think was probably the big takeaway from that message.
Right.
But Yeah. And so Noah was a man of faith. Noah was found righteous the same way you and I are found righteous. His faith was in the promise of God, yet unseen. Our faith is in Jesus, the fulfillment of that promise.
Yep. Yeah. Dude, that's great. So God calls Noah to build this ark, and he's going to flood the world.
He's going to flood the world. He's going to wipe it out.
That can make God. So we talked about this in the very beginning. We can question God's character when we see evil things in the world. And we can go, is God actually good? This feels like one of those things of like, is God actually good for doing this? Why does God flood the world? We see this downward spiral of sin, but if you could speak to that, that would be like, should we question God's character? I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and maybe we even wrap up on this. So let's talk about the flood and God's wrath.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about the promise that comes after it. Because I think the question we're asking, and it's the modern fracture, ancient truth. So the modern fracture is because of how wicked and evil our world is, God must not be real. You look around our world and it's evil and it's wicked. I can't believe in God. How many people used to do campus ministry? How many people would say, I can't believe in God because had he let my cousin die?
Totally.
Had he allowed my mom to get cancer?
Yeah.
Like why you can't believe.
Yeah.
The ancient truth is that God justly, righteously, and perfectly judges and punishes sin in his timing, which is long suffering. And so what we see in the flood narrative is that God, his wrath is against the unrighteous. It is against the unjust. And in the flood, God is going to wipe out every living, breathing thing besides Noah and his family he's going to save. And we think of Noah's Ark as this like cute, cuddly kids' Bible story of like the rainbow and the
It's
animals.
always in the nurseries.
It's always on the nurseries.
Yeah.
And this is like the most devastating and violent thing ever to happen in the world.
Right.
I showed a picture of like people drowning.
Yeah.
And it actually says that the doors of the heavens open. So it's like pouring down rain.
Right.
And also the like oceans of the deep open up. So like tsunamis are happening.
Yeah.
So not just people are drowning, like people are literally drowning to
crushed.
death, crying out for mercy. Like they're being crushed against the earth. I don't know if I can make it more violent than that. It's violent. I want you to understand it's violent. And it's at the hand of God. Like God is actively wiping out the entire earth.
Yeah.
And that's important because we can't say God doesn't deal with wickedness. We have the flood to show us like God knows how to deal with wickedness. What we have to understand is, okay, well, what is God doing about all the wickedness today? And we talked about the Sean Ryan, Wes Huff podcast.
Right.
And Sean Ryan basically asked Wes Huff of like, dude, where is God when all this? So basically we're talking about like human and sex trafficking. Like, how does God not just wipe those people out?
Right.
Both of us are fathers, men of integrity, love Jesus. We look at stuff like that and like, we could go knock down some doors and beat up some dudes for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like,
It
would
puts
love
a fire
to do that.
in your belly when you see stuff like that.
Yes. And you're like, so how is God up there not just like wiping these dudes out?
Totally.
What we have to understand is, and you and I heard this a long time ago together, but okay, well, we want to wipe out human trafficking. Okay, well, you can't just wipe out the people who are currently doing it because then just more people will do it.
Right.
So you have to actually root out the sin of it, or you have to get rid of the root of the issue.
Right.
So what's the root of the issue of human trafficking? Pride, selfishness, greed, money, power, and lust. Okay, so what God needs to do is he needs to wipe out everybody who has any of those sins.
Yeah, that's all of us.
Okay, none of us are standing.
Right.
So what God actually does, and God takes care of it, is God sends his son, and not like, oh, look, the Jesus juke, right? But seriously, he sends Jesus to live the perfect life, to be the perfect spotless lamb and sacrifice. And on Jesus, it says the entire wrath of God for mankind is poured out on him, that he drinks the full cup of God's wrath. We think about, I have it here somewhere, Matthew 26:39 and 42, Jesus in the garden. And he's like, God, if this cup could pass, let it pass. He says his sweat becomes like blood. Like he is like stressed beyond all imagination, not just because he knows he's about to be tortured and hung on a cross. He knows he's about to drink the full cup of God's wrath for sin, which we just look at the flood and look at how devastating that was. That's about to come on Jesus.
Yeah.
And so God's wrath is satisfied, but he spares you and I by Jesus going to the cross and drinking it. Dude, the freaking beauty of the gospel. Like,
right.
that's it, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to explain it more. Like, that is it. So God's wrath has been poured out on Jesus. So sinners can be reconciled back to God. Our biggest issue isn't that we need more legislation, isn't that we need more armies, isn't that, I heard someone say this about Islam. Islam's a really big deal right now. And the anti-terrorism guys in our government were talking to a group of pastors and said, hey, we can't drop bombs to convince people otherwise. Like, we can't just like root out ideologies by dropping bombs on people. But the gospel can change hearts. And every radical Islamic person who comes to know Jesus and has a heart transformation, you've actually just disabled terrorism.
Dang.
It's like, that's crazy.
That's good.
And that's what God does at the cross with Jesus. And he will come back. And if you are found in Jesus, the wrath has been taken for you.
Yeah.
You'll be found righteous. For those who aren't in Jesus, you will drink that cup of God's wrath. Eternity in hell is your reality, which is heavy to talk about.
Right. But it's true.
It's true.
Yeah. I think that it can bring a sense of peace knowing that God judged the world and flooded the world because of sin.
Mm-hmm.
And if God's going to judge sin, he has to judge the entirety of sin. And there's a longing as a Christian for Christ to come back, right? Like, we should be praying this all the time. Christ, come and come quickly. Like, we want you to return because we want to live in eternity with you.
Yeah.
But as soon as Christ comes back, all of sin is being dealt with. And I think God is long suffering because he wants as many people to be in heaven as possible.
100%.
Right? And so if he comes back now, he judges sin in its entirety, like in the flood. And if you're not found in Christ, the wrath of God does come upon you. If you are in Christ, you are justified because he took upon God's wrath. Like, there is a reality that will all be dealt with. And thank God that Jesus didn't return 12 years ago. Because
Totally.
if he was, I'm taking God's wrath. Christ wasn't taking it for me. And so thank God he was long suffering for my sake, for your sake.
Totally.
And I think that is one of the things that we can find peace in, of like, God's going to judge sin. But we want to see sinners get saved, or else they are taking God's wrath. Speak to like our motivation as Christians, because you can't hear this and do nothing. Like, what should we do hearing something like this?
Yeah, I heard a pastor once talk about the flood, and the flood not only shapes our worldview, but also pushes us towards mission. And so I do think we should be thinking, hey, there's an ark, a wooden boat saved Noah and brought salvation, a wooden cross brings salvation for us. We want to get as many people on that boat with us as possible.
Yeah.
And I think what you said is true, that God is long-suffering in his judgment. 2 Peter 3:9, the Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance, is what you were referring to. And then just to push this all the way across the finish line, we then came back and this last week talked about Genesis 8 and 9. So now God's grace comes, the waters subside, Noah and his family get off the boat. Noah offers a offering. He builds an altar to God. The aroma is pleasant, and as God smells the aroma of the offering, it actually is that God's wrath is propitiated. And so he smells the aroma of Noah's offering, and that offering propitiates or turns aside God's wrath. I'm not going to use any smaller words. I know you're like, come on, get it even lower.
You're fine.
For the sake of time, turns aside God's wrath, which is what Jesus does for us as well. Romans says Jesus is propitiation for our sins. So this offering that Noah makes turns aside God's wrath. God puts his bow in the sky. We call it a rainbow. His bow in the sky, basically saying, I will never again wipe out the world like I have. And he acknowledges, because mankind is wicked in their hearts from the second that they are born. And so he acknowledges that. And here we have the promise that he makes to Noah. And I think what we need to leave at the end of this flood narrative, at the kind of middle of chapter 9, is that he always comes through on his promises. So he made that promise to Noah thousands of years ago, and he has been faithful to that promise. Every time we see a rainbow, we can remember that he is faithful to it. And so we can remember that God is going to be faithful to his promises. And I would just encourage people, on Sunday I put a whole list of like God's promises that he makes to us up on the screen. And that if the flood story tells us anything, it's that God will deal with sin. Jesus has dealt with sin on our behalf if we're found in him. God makes promises like Jesus will return, and he's always been faithful to every promise he's ever made. And so every promise that we have in the Bible, we should know them, we should remember them, we should recite them, we should tell the devil to pound sand when he lies to us about them, and we really should realize that the flood, and we didn't talk about the recreation, that's fine, we'll have other podcasts, but that we can trust that God is making all things new.
Yeah, dude, that's good. This was a great conversation. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Sorry we went way longer than we thought we were going to, but that's probably going to be typical.
We're sub an hour.
Yeah, we're doing all right. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.